You know, something happened. You remember it clearly when the words, the tone, the way the room felt, and they swear it didn't happen that way, not a little different. Completely different. And somehow, by the end of the conversation, you're the one apologizing. This isn't a quick list of red flags. This is a complete breakdown of how gaslighting actually works. Not just what it looks like from the outside, but what it does to you from the inside. Because once you understand the mechanism, you'll never mistake it for just an argument again. Gaslighting isn't lying to you. Anyone can lie to you. Gaslighting is something more specific and more dangerous. It's convincing you that your own memory, your own perception, your own reality can't be trusted. And the person doing it doesn't need a weapon or a raised voice. They just need time and your trust. Here's what makes this so effective, and why it works even on intelligent, self-aware people who would never fall for an obvious lie. Your brain is built to trust the people closest to you. That trust is efficient, means you don't have to fact-check every sentence from your partner, your parent, your boss. But that same efficiency is what gets exploited. When someone you trust confidently tells you that's not what happened, your brain doesn't immediately think they're lying. It thinks maybe I'm misremembering. This is amplified by something psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. If someone were cruel to you constantly, you'd leave. But if the cruelty is mixed with real warmth, real affection, real good days, your brain holds on to the good days as proof that the bad days were an aberration, not a pattern. You start explaining away the damage using the exact evidence that should be warning you, and it compounds. Isolated gaslighting is confusing. Repeated over months or years, it starts to feel like your baseline. You stop noticing the fog because you've been standing in it so long. So let's break down the 5 signs. Not just what they look like, but what's actually happening underneath each one. Meet David. David remembers a conversation clearly. His partner agreed to split the rent differently this month because of a shared expense. He remembers where they were sitting. He remembers the exact words. A week later, when the bill comes up, his partner looks at him and says, "I never said that." You're making things up again. Not, "I don't remember it that way." Not, "Let's talk about it." Flat, confident denial of something David has no doubt happened. Here's the phrase to listen for: "That never happened." Said with total certainty. No hesitation, no room for negotiation, even about small, easily verifiable things. The psychological mechanism here is called source confusion. But the gaslighter isn't relying on confusion, indeed, they're relying on confidence. Confident denial is disorienting because most people, when they're actually wrong, hedge. They say, "I don't think that's right," or "Are you sure?" The gaslighter doesn't hedge. And that certainty is what makes you doubt yourself instead of them. The internal effect on David isn't anger. It's something quieter and worse. He starts keeping mental notes before conversations. He starts wondering if he's the unreliable one. Over time, he stops trusting his own memory enough to bring things up at all. Sarah tells her manager that a comment he made in a meeting embarrassed her in front of the team. His response: "You're way too sensitive." "I was just joking." Everyone else thought it was funny. Notice what happened there. Sarah didn't ask whether it was funny. She said how it made her feel. And the response wasn't an apology or even a clarification. It was a redirection to how she is the problem for feeling that way. The phrase to listen for: "You're too sensitive," or its cousins, "You're overreacting," "You're making a big deal out of nothing," "Calm down." The mechanism here is emotional invalidation used as a control tool. It works because most people, when told they're overreacting, do a quick internal check. Am I overreacting? That's a healthy instinct in general. But a gaslighter exploits that healthy instinct by triggering it constantly, on purpose, until you second-guess every emotional response you have, even the accurate ones. The internal effect is a kind of emotional muting. Sarah starts pre-editing her feelings before she expresses them, running them through a filter of, "Will this get dismissed?" before she even opens her mouth. Eventually, she stops bringing things up altogether, not because the problem stopped, but because raising them stopped feeling safe. This one is quieter than the first 2, And it's often the most effective because it doesn't look like control at all. It looks like concern. Your friends don't really understand our relationship. Your family has always been a little dramatic. Don't take everything they say seriously. I just don't think you need other people's opinions on this. It's between us. None of these sentences sound alarming on their own. That's exactly the point. Each one, individually, could be a reasonable thing a person says once. But said repeatedly over time, they form a pattern. Every outside voice gets subtly discredited, one at a time, until the only perspective left in the room is the gaslighter's. The mechanism is straightforward but effective. Gaslighting relies on you having no external reality check. If you tell a friend what happened and they say, "Wait, that's not okay," the spell breaks. So the gaslighter's instinct, conscious or not, is to make those outside checks feel unnecessary or untrustworthy or unavailable. The internal effect is a shrinking world, not a dramatic cutoff from friends and family, just a slow reduction in how often you call them, how much you tell them, how much weight you give their reactions. You start feeling like explaining your relationship to someone else would take too much energy, so you stop trying. And the less you talk to anyone else, the more the gaslighter's version of reality becomes the only version you hear. This is the sign most people miss because it seems to contradict everything else. If someone is gaslighting you, shouldn't they be cruel all the time? No, and that's exactly why it works. Think back to the intermittent reinforcement we talked about earlier. If David's partner were dismissive and cold every single day, David would have left months ago. The pattern would be too obvious to ignore. But instead, there are good weeks, genuinely good weeks, thoughtful gestures, real affection, moments that feel like evidence. The relationship is fine. Those good moments aren't fake, necessarily. That's what makes this so confusing, but they function like a reset button. Each good period makes the previous bad period feel like an exception rather than a pattern. And because your brain naturally weighs recent positive experiences heavily, the good week can completely override the memory of 3 difficult ones. The phrase to listen for isn't really a phrase, it's a rhythm. A cycle of tension followed by a rupture, followed by unusually intense warmth or apology, followed by a slow return to tension. If you map out your relationship over the last 6 months and you can see that cycle repeating, that's the sign, not any single incident. The internal effect is what keeps people in these dynamics far longer than they'd expect. You're not staying because you're being fooled constantly. You're staying because you're chasing the version of them that shows up during the good weeks, convinced that version is the real one and the difficult one is the exception. This is the sign that ties everything together because it's not something the gaslighter does directly. It's what happens to you as a result of everything else. Notice the moment you're not even sure what you did wrong, but you find yourself saying, "I'm sorry anyway," just to end the tension. You apologize for bringing something up. You apologize for having a reaction. You apologize preemptively before a conversation even starts, just in case. This is clearest evidence that the first 4 signs have taken hold, because none of this is really about guilt. It's about de-escalation. Somewhere along the way, you learn that disagreement leads to a fight you can't win. A fight where your memory gets overwritten, your feelings get dismissed, and you end up isolated and exhausted. Apologizing became the fastest way out. The internal effect here is most corrosive of all 5, because it's not about any single interaction anymore. It's about identity. You start to see yourself as someone who's too much, too sensitive, always causing problems, even though if you traced every conflict back to its origin, you'd struggle to find where you actually did anything wrong. Look at these 5 signs together, and you'll notice they're not really about 5 separate behaviors. They're building toward one outcome. Your trust in your own perception erodes piece by piece until someone else's version of reality feels safer than your own. Rewriting the past attacks your memory. Minimizing your feelings attacks your emotional judgment. Isolating you from others removes your outside reality checks. Mixing kindness with cruelty keeps you emotionally invested instead of walking away. And apologizing for things that aren't your fault is the final result, a version of you That's already conceded the argument before it starts. None of this requires the gaslighter to be a calculated villain twirling a mustache. Some people do this consciously and deliberately, but many people who gaslight are doing it from their own unprocessed fear of being wrong or their own need for control without ever consciously deciding, I'm going to make this person doubt themselves. That doesn't make the impact any less real. It just means the fix isn't about diagnosing their intentions. It's about protecting your own perception. Regardless of why they're doing it, if you recognized even one of these signs while watching this, here's what actually helps. First, document your reality. Not out of paranoia, but because gaslighting specifically targets your confidence in your memory. A note in your phone, a text you sent a friend right after something happened, a journal entry. These become anchors you can return to when someone tries to rewrite what occurred. You don't need to prove anything to them. You need proof for yourself. Second, deliberately keep outside perspective in the loop. Not to build a case against someone, but because isolation is one of the 5 signs for a reason. It removes your reality check. Talk to someone you trust about what's actually happening, not the edited version, the real one. Third, pay attention to the cycle, not just the incidents. One bad conversation doesn't mean gaslighting. A repeating pattern of tension, rupture, intense warmth, and reset. That's the shape to watch for. And finally, notice the apologies. If you find yourself constantly apologizing for having a reaction, having a memory, or having feeling, that's not a personality flaw you need to fix. It's information. It's telling you that somewhere your instinct to protect the relationship has started to override your instinct to protect yourself. You're not too sensitive. You're not remembering things wrong. And you're not the problem for noticing a pattern that was designed to be hard to notice. This has been a note in the margins. If this helped you recognize something you've been living with, or something someone you love has been living with, consider subscribing. We explore the psychology, history, and science hiding in plain sight. The patterns nobody names until you finally see them. The important stuff is always in the margins. See you in the next one.